Everybody, thanks for watching and thanks for taking the time to purchase and support. I know it's a lot of people, that are not able to, buy this video. So I really appreciate you guys spending your money, taking the time. A lot of people are affected by what's happening with coronavirus, of course. It's one of the reasons why I put out personal economic series to get people to make sure they are able to withstand something like this. Like I said, you never know, something can happen. You want to make sure you got a contingency, you got savings set aside to where you can survive without having to depend on the government for, stimulus or anything else. So just like they can, give us food stamps and provide a way for us to eat, they can also take away our ability to eat and our finances and everything else. So if you rely on them, then you have to deal with all that. So I appreciate you guys, taking the time to support and purchase and understand that one, the show must go on. The information must keep flowing. We got to keep teaching. We got to keep getting this information out. A lot of people have been requesting this video. A lot of people want to know a lot about Zoroastrianism. And the main reason for that is once you really start digging into the religion yourself, you can see how highly conscious it is. I mean, Zoroastrianism, the teachings are so conscious, and it really makes you look at the religion like, what did they know? And how did this religion not survive? Because it makes so much sense, way more sense than Islam. So it's a reason for that. So we're going to get into that. And you got to really look at where it's coming from. And that's the main points we're going to get into with this whole video. So you got to understand, one, the history first of Zoroastrianism and what's being said about it. And then you have, the religion itself and why it is what it is. I, for one, do not believe that Zoroastrianism, the way it is right now, as it sits, is the same as it was, back then. I think a lot of it has been changed after conquest, and it possibly was, more straightforward than what it is now, understanding, the people. But it's still good. Still a lot of good teaching in it, and it's stuff that you can take away from it when you start to study it. And it just goes right back to Kindle. It goes right back to consciousness and everything that we basically are about as conscious people, as far as our consciousness and energy. And it's mind-blowing. So we're going to really get into that. So again, thank you guys for purchasing and supporting. We're going to really have to look at the history of the Persian people. As I said, talked about this in the videos before, ancient history series, and part 1 of ancient religions. You got to really get into history and where people come from. So we know Zoroastrianism goes back to the Persian Empire. And I talked about the history of these people and what it goes back to and the teachings that they had, and basically how they came about as far as the people. So Zoroastrianism, Persian Empire, we know Iran is basically the remnants of the old Persian Empire. And we got into this whole thing. So just to elaborate, you have to understand, one, the ancient Egyptian empire fell first to the Persians. So we have to look at how did this happen. When you look at the Persian Empire and them growing up and growing in numbers, and how were they able to still conquer and challenge the Egyptians and sustain, sustain them conquering the Egyptians for so long? Because everybody that came into Kemet, if they managed to conquer the Egyptians eventually will overthrow them. They will eventually have civil war and fight for years and years. And we know when the Persians finally took over, the Egyptians fought for about 70 years until, it was finally done and the Persians finally got a hold on the Egyptian people. And it's not coincidence that once they got that hold, the Greeks came in and took the whole entire thing from them. So, and that's part of what this whole thing is about. We got to get into the Greek aspect of the Persian people. And as I talked about in those videos, it's far-fetched and hard for people to believe when you get into the whole thing. I know a lot of people contact me about it, and when they start really digging into it, they could see how what I was explaining was real. So first thing is, the people we call the Persian people, modern day Iran, are a creation, basically. So understand the powers that be, the hierarchy of the Greeks, or whoever is controlling the powers that be, understood that they could not come into Kemet and simply use the Greeks to conquer the Egyptians, because they were learning from the Egyptians. They were coming in there and the people loved the Egyptians. So what they would do is a series of breeding. So they would go north of Greece and breed to create the Macedonians. They will also go over to what we know as Iraq and create the Persian Empire. So, talked about before, you have the Aryans. Aryans coming down from the north. Now the Aryans would mix in with the people of the Indus Valley and the people in India. They would mix in with those people and create the Persian people. This is where they come from. So you also have to understand that the Indus Valley were basically people, Africans coming from Ethiopia mostly, and traveling over to India. They would become the Indus Valley civilization. They would also become, the people of India. So you had this mixing of the Aryans coming down, mixing in with the Indus Valley, mixing in with Ethiopians, mixing in with Indians. And you have this mixture. These are the Persian people once they all come together and they all mixing together. This was deliberately done, and that empire was deliberately created and established to later conquer, so that people could not see the true plans of the Aryans. So picture this, just think about it. You have the Aryans coming down, you have white people coming down, and they're coming into different civilizations in Africa and learning. They're coming in and learning. The people that was traveling with them, the other white people, that are just the regular people, whether they knew or not the true agenda of the hierarchy, we don't know. But the true agenda was eventually to take these lands, to learn from these people and take their shit, plain and simple. So you can't just have different skirmishes. You can't have, okay, the Aryans coming into one part, conquering and taking over, coming into this part, conquering and taking over. The word would get out. So what they would do was mix in, play a nice role, and eventually take the throne, eventually conquer from within. That was their MO. That's how they did their thing. So something on the scale of what they were planning could not get out. So they bred these people and they set them, built the empire. And eventually, the Greeks would give them the keys to the back door for Egypt, and they would come into Egypt, conquer the Egyptians, and the Greeks would basically take over later from the Persians. So the whole story we have of Alexander and everything and the wars and all that, we do not know is true. We can't really prove much of it. We don't know exactly what happened, but we can see through history that the Persians, yes, conquered the Egyptians. The Greeks conquered the Persians and took the Egyptian empire, which, as I said, the Greeks was living with the Egyptians. So once you took back the Egyptian empire, why not then give it back to its rightful people, the Egyptians? Which shows you their plan all along, the Greeks, was to take that land. And they bred the Persians to do exactly that for them. So same thing you had in the Macedonians. You have already the Minoans, which are the original Black Greeks, being conquered by these Aryans coming down from the north. And they would basically breed and slowly take over the Minoans. Now, the mindset of people back then was not black-white. They understood who these people were. So we can't just say this and that. But that's essentially what it was. The whites conquering all the dark-skinned land. So you have the Minoans eventually, being slowly conquered. And when they talk about in history, the wars between the Athenians and the Spartans, we look at all this Greek history and a civil war between the Greeks, that's bullshit. That's a lie to cover up what it really was. It was the white Greeks versus the Black Greeks, plain and simple, taking over. Again, there's no way in the world that you have the Greeks doing everything they're doing as far as the Athenians being so, intelligent and having society and so on and so forth. There's no way they could not know up north the Macedonians had amassed an entire empire and kingdom that was basically coming to rival them and take their shit. So it's basically what happened. It's the same thing with the Persians. There's no way in the world nobody could have seen or couldn't have seen the Persian Empire growing as big as it grown and not, say something about it. So the Greeks knew exactly what they was doing. The Africans in North Africa, the Egyptians, were basically slaves to these people. So they had no clue to really do anything about it, once they got conquered. So we know eventually the Greeks would stab the Persians in the back. And this would later lead to the Persian Empire basically coming together and rising up and coming at the Roman Empire, which was now in control of the lands that the Persians once had. Rome came and basically combined with Greece, and the Persians fought them for hundreds of years, as history shows us. That's something we can prove. So we know that. But before all this happened, it's almost like a prequel. It's almost like a prequel, like, the Star Wars saga, where you had the end movies first and then you have the beginning movies later. So this is basically what this is. You have to go back and you got to look at the beginning. Before all that happened, you had to understand, one, what took place with the Persian Empire. How did they get that whole thing off the ground? And what did they teach these people to, one, not only, conquer themselves or do something like what the Greeks was trying to do, but to basically keep control of these people. And that's one of the things that when we look at, we're not going to find too much information on, but we can kind of sort of, from the facts that we do know, determine that this is exactly what happened, what I'm going to explain. So one of the things is this: you got to go and look at the bloodline of the Persian people. So for anybody who has any doubts of where the Persians come from, because you'll have Persian people who think they are just a race that has always existed, like Africans. It's the same thing with Mexicans, the same thing with Puerto Ricans. They think that their race is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old, when it is not. You have to understand what happened and how the mixing in of the Aryans with Black people, and then in different parts of the world, you have different climates that causes skin color, skin pigmentation to increase or decrease, which creates the different races that we know on the planet. Fact. So people got to understand, one, so when you try to trace back the Persian Empire, the Persian people, I should say, we know they just drop off at some point in history and they don't know where they come from. So you have, and one of the reasons you can tell this is all Greek doing, is you have the mythology of the Persian people. They're surrounded by mythology, Greek mythology. So we can see what's going on here. So when you look at the chart here, because you have Darius. Darius talks about the lineage of his family going back to Archimedes. And then you look at Archimedes and there's nothing else. It stops there. So we have to go into where did he come from and who is he? And this is Persian we're talking about. So mind you, this whole thing follows the same type of scenario as Greek mythology. So we look at Plato. And Plato tells us in Alcibiades, this is Alcibiades right here. Plato was saying here, Archimedes was the founder of the dynasty, which ruled Persia until the conquest by Alexander the Great. Herodotus gives a list of Archimedes' descendants down to Xerxes. Scroll down here real quick. It says, for the closest connection of Zeus to Archimedes was that Archimedes was a Persian, and the Persians were supposedly descended from Perseus, the son of Perseus, the son of Zeus. Now, Archimedes' mother is Andromeda, who is the Ethiopian queen. So you had the same scenario, the same type of situations with Andromeda and Perseus as you had with Sheba, Queen Sheba, and King Solomon. These are all biblical things, and as I showed you, this goes back to Greeks. The Greeks created this stuff. So remember, all the paintings that they show of Andromeda with Perseus, she's white, when she's clearly Ethiopian, and you have some depictions of her being black, but they changed all of those to her being white. So we know they tried to basically whitewash, a long time ago. And a lot of these paintings are very old, hundreds of years old, and they still painted her white when she's clearly from Ethiopia. And show me a white civilization that's in Ethiopia. So we know what was going on here. It was the same thing with Solomon and Queen Sheba. So you have this whole thing where they know what's up with the history and where these people come from, but they try to whitewash it. So we're not going to really get into much the Greek mythology aspect of it because it's a lot, but understand them trying to basically explain where the Persians came from. When they do, it goes back to Greek mythology and saying that these people are basically descendants of Greek mythological people, which is basically telling you straight up that the Greeks created them. It's basically what they're saying. So when you go back and start to look at that, you'll find a lot of information about that. And it's confusing if you get caught all up in that. It'll take away from Zoroastrianism itself. So you got to look at Zarathustra or Zoroaster, however you want to pronounce his name, or whatever name you want to use. He's the one you got to look at. He's the one you really got to look at and follow his history, which again, we can't really get too much into because it goes back to his clan, and then we don't have too much information about them as well. So you got to look at that, and you got to look at everything else that's suspicious that surrounds the religion, basically all to cover up the fact that it was created by the Greeks, the same as Islam, the same as Christianity, the same as Judaism. These are all Greek religions created. It's just with Zoroastrianism, it gives you way more insight. It's more on the forefront of what the hidden meaning of Christianity and Judaism is showing us. So in Zoroastrianism, is more out there as far as the fact that Christianity is talking about consciousness and so on and so forth. It's more out there in Zoroastrian belief. So it's saying here, Zarathustra or Zoroaster, family and formative years. Sometime during the 15th or 12th centuries before the Common Era, BCE, and maybe during the 13th century, there lived a Irano-Aryan clan. Think about that. Named Spitama, which means white or very white. They dwelled in Ariana Veja. The original Aryan homeland was comprised the Euro-Asian steppes between the Volga River and southwestern Siberia, and the Spitamas may have lived in northwestern Kazakhstan near the present Russian border. So right from the bat, they're giving you that connection with the Aryans and these people. And you have the Irano-Aryan people or Irano-Aryan clan, just basically telling you just the Aryans mixed with these people from Iran, just the Persians, basically what it's saying. So you have to look at the whole story of Zoroaster, which we'll get into a little bit, with his mom. So his mom, Dagdova, which basically means milkmaid. So their names are weird. So Dagdova, his mom, she basically lived in the same, you might as well say like the same town as Zoroaster's dad. And what happened was, she was young. She was a young teenager who was considered to be like very beautiful, like so beautiful that was out of the ordinary how beautiful she looked. They say she had like a white glow to her. And during her teenage years, like her town or her village, fell sick. Like everybody was getting sick and ill, and she was fine. Nothing was wrong with her. So they say she was doing some kind of, witch spell or some kind of voodoo stuff to them, making everybody sick because she wanted to, she felt like everybody was ugly or something like that. So they chased her out of town. It sounds crazy, but that's basically what it's saying. Chased her out of town, And her father was cool with the people in the Spitama clan who basically took her in. So her father's friend took her in, and that's where she met her husband, who is Zoroaster's father, or who would become his father, Porochaspa, which means many horses. You have Zoroaster's name supposedly mean one or two things. It either means golden light or yellow camel. So they're trying to really break down that language to see exactly what it means, but it probably means golden light more than yellow camel. But his father and that clan, they were horse breeders. That's what their clan was about. The Spitamas was horse breeders. They bred horses. That's what they was known for. So you have the story of his mom being chased out of her town, basically her home, going to her dad's friend's home where she meets her future husband. They have 5 sons. One of them is Zoroaster, the founder of the religion of Zoroastrianism. Now, Zoroaster, as a kid, was basically defiant. Not defiant like in a bad way. He had a lot of questions. So he didn't really believe in the faith that they was, raised up to believe in, which we don't know exactly what that faith was, but we know they believed in Asha, which Asha is basically like divine, guidance. So it's like the divine plan. So they believed in that. And you had his first teacher come in and teach him. His teacher name was Persian People. And his teacher taught him about the Asha. And Asha, again, is truth. It's like the divine plan. So Asha is something that, set well with Zoroaster, but when you look at the world and everything that was going on, he had a lot of questions. So as a kid, when, he would go out, the priest would try to teach him and talk to him, he would always ask them intelligent questions, or he would always question everything they were saying as a kid. It talks about in the Gathas, we'll get into that. In the Gathas, you have a bunch of verses, which the Gathas is basically like the books and verses, talking about how, they would send him home because he would ask them questions, or he would defy their priestly authority, and they would send him home and, come and talk to his parents and say, hey, he's not believing, he's not following what we're teaching. And he asked so many good questions, valid questions, and he was real critical. And he rebutted everything they said. Every time they had to say something, he had a good rebuttal. He had rebuttals that were so good, it caused a lot of people to question their faith. It caused one chief priest his life. One of the chief priests was so perplexed. He was so messed up by the questions that young Zoroaster was presenting to him that he eventually died, because he said he couldn't really handle the questions that he was asking him, because it basically destroyed his whole way of life. So you had him at this young age, Zoroaster, super smart, asking questions, and by the age of 15, he was basically already a priest. So he was already a priest, and he was already studying and learning, and still had doubts. By the age of 20, he left home. He basically gave up his inheritance and left it to his 4 brothers and said, I'm out. I'm going to figure out what this whole thing is about. Don't care about money. I'm gone. So he sought out, wandering town to town, just looking at the way things were. And more as he wandered, he had questions. He doubted his faith because he's seen the evils in the world. He's seen the good things. He's seen old age. He's seen young age. He's seen, the growth and how people grow and how everything had a dual nature to it. So his life is basically the same as Siddhartha, Buddha. So when you look at the story of Buddha, it's very, very similar to the story of Zoroaster. As far as, Buddha, remember, same thing. He was a rich kid. He went out finally to see the world, and he's seen, old people, young people, people rich, people poor, and it caused him to doubt everything. He could have just stayed home and had whatever he wanted and assumed the throne, but those things bothered him to the point that he became Buddha. So it's amazing. It's the same type of story as we're going to see as we go on. These stories that we find in the more well-known religions are the same as Zoroastrianism, because they all piggyback off each other. So you have with Zoroastrianism, we had Zoroaster going out seeing all these things and seeing the evils and everything like that. And it really messed with him that he had so much doubt in his faith. So he called that doubt. He called that doubt, and he called that evil that basically messed with him every day and gave him evil thoughts and so on and so forth. He called it Angra Mainyu. And Angra Mainyu is basically like the devil of Zoroastrianism. You have Ahura Mazda would be God, but Asha can also be considered like, God, but it's not a being. It's just like Asha is just, divine plan or the divine order of the universe. Asha. So you have Asha, you have Ahura Mazda, you have Angra Mainyu. And there's a bunch of other stuff that you'll see in Zoroastrianism. We're not going to get into all that because I don't want nothing to take away from the overall understanding of this. So he called it Angra Mainyu, right? So in the Gathas, you also have a story of Zoroastrianism, or Zoroaster, when he's going out and trying to figure this whole thing out. He's wandering, he's in a desert, and he has Angra Mainyu come and tempt him. We know where that comes from. We know where we find that at. We find it in the Bible with the devil coming to tempt Jesus. We see where they got that from. And understand that, this is old. Stuff is older than Christianity. So we know which one came first. So, or they could have came around the same time when it was creating all this shit back in AD times. We don't really know. But we know that these stories do piggyback off of each other and have the same type of stuff. But deep down, it's the same thing I'm going to explain to you guys here. But he was tempted by Angra Mainyu, the devil, and offered him all this stuff and wanted him to basically give praise to the way the world was, which is something he couldn't do. So you also have, around this time, he's 20, he's going out seeing the world, he has all these questions, he's learning so much. But then it says here, at the age of 20, Zoroaster is said to have left his home to meditate in the cave. His first vision of Ahura Mazda, Lord of Life and Wisdom, was received when he was 30. 7 other visions, 6 communications with Ahura Mazda's powers, later known as the Amisha Spinta, which we'll talk about, immortal shining ones, or benevolent immortals. And a homiletic dialogue followed the first vision over a period of years. Stop right there. What does that sound like? Same thing happened with Islam and Muhammad. He went into a cave where he heard the voice of Allah speaking to him in Arabic. And over a period of, 23 years, he broke down the Quran and all these teachings and everything to him. And that's how we get the Quran. And we get, Islam and the religion and so on and so forth. It's the same stuff. So we got to see, when you go back to Zoroastrianism, a lot of you guys know how a lot of this stuff is coming from Zoroastrianism, and how the modern, 3 main religions took from ancient religions to give us what we have. So as Zoroaster started to get these teachings, he would go out and teach. I think the first person he converted was his cousin. So he would go out and teach these, these different aspects of Ahura Mazda. And he wanted people to know that, Asha was a lot more to Asha. And that Ahura Mazda was this overall god, of Asha, which Asha, again, is divine order. And you had this overall god, which was Ahura Mazda, which when you break it down to understand, Ahura Mazda would basically be consciousness, which every god, Allah, God, so on and so forth, really is talking about consciousness, which is the overall God. So he wanted people to understand that Ahura Mazda had basically 7 aspects to him. And from the great mind, or from the mind of Ahura Mazda, you have the Vaistra Mingna, which basically is talking about the thoughts into being. It's also known as the active will, or the bountiful spirit, or Holy Spirit. So this is an aspect of Ahura Mazda. So from this, you have 6 lesser parts of Ahura Mazda, and they're split up into 2 groups: the male part and the female part. So the masculine part and the feminine part. So you have these 6 different aspects, right? So the male part, you have Asha, again, which is divine order. You have good mind, and you have sovereignty. That would make up the male part, or this big divine part of Ahura Mazda. So you have the feminine aspect of this, which would be the Armati, armati, which we'll talk about that in a second. You have armati, you have perfect thought and well-being, and you also have immortality. So one of the main reasons why a lot of people want to get into this, because you can see what it's getting into. You have masculine and feminine, plain and simple. These coming together gives us the one, the true power, the true essence of us, male and female. So when you understand that you have these male and female parts going back to one mind, and that one mind is thought into being. So having these aspects of yourself, or understanding these aspects of yourself, will basically give you the power of God, which of course, again, when you break it down, you are God, and understanding how, you can manifest, and understanding how meditation plays a big part in all of this.